She heard it at dawn. Mae Prescott was standing on the back porch of her homestead, pouring the last of the creek water into the wash basin, when the sound came up from the ground like something the earth had been holding in its throat. A voice. A woman's voice, thin and distant and echoing off stone, singing a hymn that Mae recognized because her own mother had sung it at the kitchen table in Virginia 30 years ago. "Shall we gather at the river?" The melody rising from the dirt behind the house, where the well stood with its wooden cover and its rope coiled on the post and its bucket that hadn't been lowered in over a year because the water had gone in July, and there was nothing down there now but 30 feet of dry limestone and the smell of dust. Mae set the basin down and listened. The singing stopped, then it started again. Fainter this time, the words breaking apart the way words do when the person singing them is running out of air, or running out of hope, or both. She walked to the well. The wooden cover was still in place, the same cover Virgil had built from oak planks and iron hinges the year they dug the well, but it was shifted slightly, a gap of 6 inches on the south side where the wood had warped in the heat, and the hinge had rusted and nobody had fixed it because Virgil was dead, and Mae had stopped fixing things that didn't directly keep her alive. She slid the cover off and looked down into the well. 30 feet of limestone shaft, 2 feet across, going straight down into the dark. The morning light reached about 10 feet before the shadow took over, and below that there was nothing to see. But there was something to hear. "Hello?" Mae called. The singing stopped. Silence. Then a voice came up from the bottom, cracked and dry and barely holding together. "Please. I fell in. 3 days ago. Please." Mae's hands went to the rope on the post. Her body moved before her mind caught up because that is how the frontier works. You act before you think because thinking takes time, and time is the thing people at the bottom of wells don't have. She grabbed the bucket and lowered it on the rope, letting it drop fast, the rope burning through her palms, and when it hit bottom, she heard a sound that broke something in her chest, the sound of a person drinking water from a bucket, the way an animal drinks from a trough, desperate and gasping and grateful, in a way that goes past words into something older than language. She pulled the bucket up empty and lowered it again, this time with a piece of bread wrapped in cloth wedged against the inside. She lowered it 3 times. Water, bread, water. Then she tied the rope to the post and ran to the barn for the longer rope, the one Virgil had used to pull stumps, 60 feet of braided hemp that could hold a horse. She rigged it to the post and lowered the loop end down the well and called down, "Put this under your arms. I'm going to pull you up." It took 40 minutes. Mae was strong from a year of running a homestead alone, but pulling a person up 30 feet of vertical limestone is not the same as pulling fence wire or hauling water from the creek. She braced her boots against the stone rim of the well and pulled hand over hand, the rope cutting into her palms, her shoulders burning, her teeth clenched against the weight. The rope moved an inch at a time. She could hear the woman below her gasping and scraping against the stone walls, trying to help, trying to push with her feet against the rough limestone, and the sound of cloth tearing and skin scraping, and both of them breathing hard enough to fill the well with the sound of effort. The woman came over the rim of the well like something being born. She rolled onto the grass and lay on her back and stared at the sky and breathed and didn't move. Mae sat beside her with the rope still in her bleeding hands and looked at what the well had given her. She was young, 19, maybe 20, long dark hair matted with mud and limestone dust, a cotton dress that had been white once and was now brown and torn in a dozen places, bruises on her arms and her shins where she had hit the walls on the way down. Her lips were cracked and her face was swollen from 3 days without food and almost without water. She had licked the damp stone walls. she would tell Mae later, because the limestone sweated in the mornings, and the moisture was enough to keep a person alive but not enough to keep them sane. "My name is Cora," the woman said, still on her back, still staring at the sky as if she had forgotten what it looked like. "I was running. I fell in the dark. I didn't see the well." "Running from what?" "From who?" Mae didn't ask more. Not yet. She helped Cora to the house and sat her in the kitchen and gave her water in small sips and bread in small bites and a wet cloth for her face and a dry cloth for her arms where the scrapes were bleeding. She moved with the efficiency of a woman who has spent a year taking care of a homestead alone and has learned that care is a series of tasks performed in order: water first, food second, wounds third, questions last. Cora ate and drank and pressed the cloth to her face and slowly came back into herself. The way a person comes back from a long way away, not all at once but in stages, the eyes focusing, the shoulders dropping, the hands unclenching, the breathing evening out from the ragged gulps of someone who has been afraid for 3 days into the slower rhythm of someone who is beginning to believe the fear might be over. She told Mae her story that afternoon. They sat on the porch in the shade, Cora in the chair that had been Virgil's and Mae on the step below. And Cora talked, and Mae listened the way she had learned to listen in the year since Virgil died, without interruption, without judgment, with the patience of a woman who knows that some stories need space the way a fire needs air. Cora had come from Tennessee. Her family had been sharecroppers who lost the land after the war and scattered to wherever work would have them. Cora had answered an advertisement in a Knoxville newspaper. Passage west, household employment, respectable situation. A man named Gideon Tolbert had paid for her train ticket and her coach fare and met her at the station in Fredericksburg with a clean white shirt and a straw hat and a smile that looked like generosity but was really just the patience of a man who knows that what he has bought will arrive on schedule. The household employment was a cotton farm east of Fredericksburg. The respectable situation was a shack behind the main house, where Cora and 2 other women lived and worked the fields from dawn to dark and cooked the meals and cleaned the house and slept on straw pallets and were paid nothing because everything they earned went to repay their passage, which Tolbert calculated with a particular kind of arithmetic that always came out in his favor. "It's not slavery," Cora said. "He'll tell you that. He'll tell anyone who asks. He paid for the tickets. The women agreed to work. There's a contract." She looked at her hands, scratched and bruised and raw from 3 days of limestone. "But the contract never ends. The debt never gets smaller. And if you try to leave, he sends men after you because you owe him. And in the hill country, a man who is owed has more rights than a woman who wants to be free." She had run 4 nights ago. She had waited until the house was dark and walked south through the cedar breaks and the live oak and the limestone ridges, walking at night and hiding during the day, heading for the Pedernales River because someone had told her that if you followed the river west, you would reach a town called Junction, where there was a stage that went to San Antonio, and San Antonio was big enough to disappear in. She had been crossing Mae's property in the dark on the 3rd night when she stepped on the warped cover of the dry well, and the wood shifted under her, and she fell 30 feet into the dark. She hit the bottom hard. Her right ankle swelled to twice its size. She couldn't climb out because the walls were smooth limestone and the shaft was too narrow to brace herself. She sat in the dark for 3 days and sang hymns because singing was the only thing she could do, and the hymns were the only words she had that weren't screaming. Mae listened to all of it. She looked at the young woman sitting in Virgil's chair wearing the bruises of a fall, and the thinner, older bruises of months of labor that no one had asked her to consent to. She thought about the well. She thought about how she had stopped lowering the bucket a year ago when the water dried up, and how she had let the cover warp, and the hinge rust, and the well become just another piece of the homestead that she had given up on. If the cover had been fixed, Cora wouldn't have fallen. If the bucket had still been lowered, Mae might have heard her sooner. The well had been dry for a year, and in that year it had become a hole in the ground that Mae walked past without looking at. The way she walked past the empty chair and the fiddle on the wall and all the other things that had stopped mattering when Virgil stopped breathing. Now the well had given her something. Not water. Something heavier than water. Hap Jessup came by that afternoon on his weekly visit. He rode up on his old bay horse with a sack of flour over the saddle, and the expression of a man who brings groceries, because bringing groceries is easier than saying, "I'm worried about you." He saw Cora on the porch and stopped and looked at Mae with the face of a man who has been on the frontier long enough to know that a bruised woman on a porch has a story, and the story is never simple. Mae told him. Hap listened with his hat in his hands and his jaw working the way it did when he was thinking, which was the same way Virgil's jaw had worked, because the two men had been friends for 30 years and had picked up each other's habits the way old friends do. "Tolbert," Hap said. "I know the name. He's got money and he's got friends on the county bench. If he comes looking for her, the sheriff will side with the contract. Then we don't let the sheriff know." Hap looked at Mae. In the year since Virgil's death, he had watched her shrink. Not physically. She was still the same strong-boned woman who had ridden out from Virginia at 19 to marry a rancher she had met once at a church social. But she had shrunk inside, pulling herself into a smaller and smaller space. Us giving up the porch and the well and the fiddle and the garden and everything, that required caring about something beyond the minimum needed to survive. Now she was standing in the yard with rope burns on her hands and a stranger's blood on her apron and something in her eyes that Hap hadn't seen in a year. Purpose. "What do you need?" he asked. "Time. A week. If Cora can rest here until her ankle heals, I can get her to Junction and put her on the stage to San Antonio. Tolbert won't look this far west. He'll look south toward the border because that's where runners go. And if he does look this far west..." Mae looked at the homestead, the house Virgil had built, the barn, the porch, the well that had given water for 6 years and then a woman at the bottom on the 7th. Then he finds a widow and a dry well and nothing else. Cora stayed. She slept in the bed because Mae insisted, and Mae slept on the floor because Mae had been sleeping on the floor since Virgil died anyway, unable to lie in the bed they had shared without reaching for a body that wasn't there. Cora's ankle was sprained, not broken, and Mae wrapped it with strips of cloth and packed it with comfrey poultice and propped it on a pillow and said, "Don't move," with the authority of a woman who has been giving orders to cattle and chickens for a year and has forgotten how to ask politely. They fell into a rhythm. Mae worked the homestead during the day, and Cora sat on the porch with her foot elevated and mended clothes and shelled beans and did the sitting work that a ranch generates in endless supply. They talked. Mae had not talked to another woman in months. Hap came by once a week, and the German family at the next ranch waved from the road sometimes. But conversation, real conversation, the kind that fills the kitchen the way heat fills a room, had been absent from Mae's life since the snakebite and the funeral and the long, silent year that followed. Cora talked about Tennessee, about the red clay and the tobacco fields and the sound of rain on a tin roof, About her mother, who had taught her to sing hymns because hymns were free and everything else cost money. About the advertisement in the newspaper and the train ride west and the moment she stepped off the coach in Fredericksburg and saw Tolbert smile and felt the first cold drop of understanding that the respectable situation was not what she had been promised. Mae talked about Virgil. For the first time since he died, she talked about him without her throat closing. She told Cora about the day he built the well, digging through limestone for 3 weeks with a pickaxe and a prayer, and how the water came up clear and cold on the 21st day, and he had stood in the yard soaked in sweat and limestone dust, and laughed the way a man laughs when the earth gives him something he wasn't sure it would. She told her about the fiddle he played on summer evenings, sitting in the porch chair with his boots off and the dog at his feet, and the hill country going purple and gold behind him. She told her about the snakebite, how fast it happened, how the venom took him in 6 hours, how she held his hand while the swelling climbed his arm, and the light went out of his eyes like a lantern being turned down 1 notch at a time. "I stopped living when he died," Mae said. "I kept working, but I stopped living. There's a difference." "I know the difference," Cora said. "I've been not living for 8 months. On the 4th day, Tolbert's man came. Mae saw the rider from the garden, a young man on a fast horse coming up the road from the east with the look of someone who has been covering ground. She told Cora to get in the root cellar, and Cora went without a word because she had been hiding from men her entire life. And the drill was the same every time. The rider stopped at the gate. He was polite. He took off his hat. He asked if Mae had seen a young woman, dark hair, might be traveling alone, might be injured. He said Mr. Tolbert was concerned for her welfare. He said there was a contract, and the young woman owed a debt, and the law was clear. Mae leaned on the fence and looked at the young man on the horse and said, "I'm a widow living alone on a dry homestead. The only thing that comes through here is jackrabbits and grief. If a woman was running through this country, she'd follow the river south. That's what I'd do." The rider nodded and tipped his hat and rode south. Mae watched him go and then stood at the fence for a long time listening to the hoofbeats fade, her heart beating in her chest hard enough to feel in her teeth, because lying to a man on horseback is not something Mae Prescott had ever done before, and she was surprised at how good she was at it. Hap came by on the 5th day with news. Tolbert's men had been seen riding south toward the border. The search was moving away from the hill country. If Cora could get to Junction by the end of the week, the stage to San Antonio ran on Saturday, and by Monday she would be in a city of 30,000 people where one more woman was invisible. Mae hitched the wagon on Friday morning. She padded the bed with quilts and put Cora in the back with water and food and a blanket and drove west toward Junction on a road that wound through cedar-covered hills and limestone valleys and past creek crossings where the water was low and the cottonwoods were just starting to yellow with fall. They drove all day, Mae on the seat and Cora lying in the back watching the sky pass above her. And they talked, and sometimes they were silent, and the silence was the good kind, the kind that happens between two people who have said enough to trust each other and don't need to fill every gap with sound. They reached Junction at dusk. The town sat at the meeting of 2 rivers, a handful of buildings and a stage depot, and a livery and not much else. Mae bought the stage ticket with money she had been saving for fence wire. She gave Cora a canvas bag with dried meat and bread and $2 in coin and a letter addressed to a woman in San Antonio who ran a boarding house and who owed Hap Jessup a favor from 20 years ago. They stood outside the stage depot in the last light of the evening and looked at each other the way 2 women look at each other when they have shared 5 days and a well and a lie and a rescue and the kind of trust that gets built fast when the stakes are high enough. "You pulled me out of a hole," Cora said. "You pulled me out of one too." Cora looked at her and understood. The well had been dry, and the bucket had been coiled on the post, and the porch chair had been empty, and the fiddle had been silent, and the woman who owned them all had been living at the bottom of her own kind of well for a year, and Cora's voice singing up from the dark had been the rope. The stage left at dawn on Saturday. Mae watched it go from the depot porch, a dust cloud heading southeast toward San Antonio, carrying a woman she had known for 5 days and would remember for the rest of her life. She drove home alone. The road was long and the hills were quiet, and the sky went from pink to blue to the deep clear indigo of a hill country evening. She pulled into the yard as the stars were coming out and sat on the wagon seat for a moment looking at the homestead. The house, the barn, the porch with the empty chair, the well with its wooden cover. She climbed down and walked to the well and slid the cover off and looked down into the dark. 30 feet of dry limestone, no water, no voice, just the smell of stone and the memory of a hymn rising from the bottom like a prayer sent in the wrong direction that somehow found the right person. She went to the barn and got the hinges and the nails and the hammer and spent an hour fixing the well cover. She planed the warped board flat and replaced the rusted hinge and set the cover straight and solid so that nobody would ever fall through it again. Then she went inside and took the fiddle down from the wall and sat in Virgil's chair on the porch and played. She played badly. She had never been good. But the sound went out into the hill country night, the way a voice goes out from the bottom of a well, looking for someone to hear it, not caring if it's pretty, just needing to rise. The stars turned overhead. The creek ran low in the valley, and a widow who had stopped living started again, one badly played note at a time, because someone at the bottom of a dry well had reminded her that the voice you use to call for help is the same voice you use to sing.